transporte y las directivas del CEFE por facilitarnos este espacio. Ayer conversamos acerca del uso y disfrute del tiempo de las mujeres en las ciudades, especialmente en el desarrollo de actividades productivas y de consumo. Hablamos de seguridad para que las mujeres podamos vivir una vida libre de violencias, de condiciones de habitabilidad y accesibilidad a servicios y de cómo planificar las ciudades con enfoque de género para acceder al ocio, la recreación y la cultura. Así que para dar inicio a este segundo día le damos la bienvenida a la secretaria distrital de la Mujer, Laura Tami Leal, para que nos acompañe, para dar apertura a esta nueva jornada y comenzar esta
New
conversación. Así que muchas gracias.
phase of this conversation. Thank you so much for being here. Welcome to the second day of our international forum. Secretary, welcome. Good morning, everyone. Thank you, everyone. Thank you to our speakers this morning, to all the media that have covered this wonderfully, but especially good morning to the care providers from Antonio Nariño who are here with us today. I sincerely think that we won this capitality of time with you guys. And additionally, I wanted to let you know that I got this incredible gift, this sweater that is woven. Where is Lucila that gave it to me? Thank you so much. Yes, Antonio Nariño is present here today. Lucela tells me that she has been trying to give me this gift for over a year, and I don't understand why it took us so long to meet. This is really spectacular. So for everyone who wasn't here yesterday perhaps, we started with this international forum, Time for Women, Gender, and Building Cities. The mayor, Carlos Fernando Galan, welcomed us, letting us know that the district care system had a bet for how we build our city that has to transcend governments because women have to be at the center of public policy, of strategy as a city. So, obviously, this pushes us forward to continue this work and to see you, the caregivers, with your energy, with your enthusiasm, really fills us with a lot of commitment that right now is the people from the Women's Secretariat is so full of this commitment, but we also have to make it fill the entirety of the city. Yesterday, we had an incredible coverage from the media, and we want to let you know that in Caracol Televisión, they interviewed one of the caregivers, and you can't imagine how filled with emotion I was when she said that they think that they leave us at home so that they can rest, but in reality, so that we can rest, but in reality, what we're doing is work. And this consciousness, this awareness about our existence and that we have been sustaining life, that this is a care task that is unpaid, and that because it's unpaid, it's not any less of a labor of work. So we have to bet on that women's time can be used freely. The care blocks have started this system of care. The state is redistributing those care loads so that women can start educating themselves, just like Lucila, who is a master weaver, and also talking about the weavers from Antonio Noriño, who have been forming themselves, who have been breathing so that they can redistribute care loads so that we can have wellness. And also, when it comes to education, it really is incredible how many women have been able to graduate from high school through the flexible education from the Education Secretariat at the care blocks. There's a slogan that has been characterizing us and that we have pushed in this administration, and it is, "We are where women need us. We are where you need us." And time is one of those resources that we have to be able to manage. And that is why we are here today. So yesterday we had those words from our mayor. We had a forum about the right to having a life free of violences, where we were accompanied by people from women from Spain, Daphne Maria Espinosa. We also had conversations about culture and how to take advantage of these cultural spaces in the city. And The biennial of art is happening right now at the city, so please do take advantage of that. And we also had many conversations about, for example, Bogotá 24 hours, which is a huge debate that we are carrying out as a city. And today we're going to talk about how cities have to be planned with a gender focus. So perhaps we have always been planning them from men's needs and men's wishes, but right now, inhabiting the city, we know that this is also a right for everyone, and it has to be contained within public policy. And that is exactly what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about mobility, something that takes time from us because that construction of the first line of the metro is going to reduce time in moving through the city in a 50%. And this is going to especially impact women. So when we have our workshop in the afternoon, we're going to be talking about how this conversation puts us at the center in this global forum. So thank you so much, and we're going to start this session today. Thank you so much, Secretary. Thank you for this opening to our second day. We thank and say hello to the team of coordinators from the care blocks that always work in our territory every single day. Today, we will have very good moments, as Secretary Moment said. Panel 1, territory planning. Then we're going to talk about climate change, and then we're going to talk about mobility. And in the afternoon, it's going to be the third panel, experiences with building urban cities. And then we're going to talk about time from theory to practice. Every time we're going to be looking at a telling of the story through a graphic relatories written and drawn. And this is being provided by the BID and by UN Women. And you can see it on the left side of the stage. This exercise is going to be part of the memoirs of our event. The organization in the International Organization for Work and the CEPAL estimate that investing in care services can generate even 31 million jobs for 2035, demonstrating its enormous potential as a source of development. In this space, we are going to reflect about how territorial planning can meet these needs, especially when it comes to care, the use of time, and mobility in order to achieve equity. So here we are starting on our second day, planning, territorial planning, care, gender, and territory. So here is Elizabeth Tejero Gil, who is the director of political territory in Barcelona, Lucia Escuro, who is the official of CEPAL, Marisol Cabrera Dalmazo, who is from the ABP for the social development here in Colombia. And we're also inviting Natalia Silva, who is the subsecretary of planning, territorial planning. This panel is being moderated by Juliana Martinez Londoño, subsecretary of care and equality. Juliana has ample experience applying policies for gender equality. She has also worked in the Ministry of Interior. Before we start, we remind you that through our media, you can also follow us and you can also learn more about our programming. So thank you again. Welcome. Thank you so much for being here today. Thank you so much to everyone. Welcome, everyone. We are so excited to be here and for the panel that we are going to open this second day with of this forum, which is dedicated to women's time. We are going to talk about urban planning, territorial planning, which are aspects that are very related to this, and you are all going to help us to understand this relationship. And what we want in this panel is to reflect how urban planning can answer women's needs, can meet women's needs, how cities can be designed around women's interests. And we have a few dimensions that are key to be able to understand when it comes to their impact on our lives. We are obviously talking about care. We are also talking about mobility and about the right of living a life that is free of violences and so that public spaces can be safe for women. So, first, I want to present or introduce. Well, they've already been introduced, but the first question is a general question for everyone in order to open the discussion. It has to do with how territory planning can contribute to build a city that guarantees women's rights, that life can carry out in terms of wellness, so that care tasks can be redistributed, and so that opportunity equality can be redistributed. So this is what has been called a feminist city or a feminist for women. So how can territory planning contribute to this? So Natalia, thank you. Well, thank you so much. Good morning. Thank you so much to the Women's Secretariat and to the Secretary for Planning. I think that to start with this subject, and this is absolutely imperative to talk about. When we know that we have a diversity of activities when it comes to responsibilities, time is really valuable. And when it comes to urban planning, we definitely have the responsibility to generate this wellness and this welfare and shorten the amount of time that we have to use when it comes to our activities. And definitely from the Secretariat of Planning, we have to talk about the plan of territorial ordinance that has a series of strategic variables that let us know how we can generate conditions when it comes to welfare, when it comes to shortening time that can provide welfare for women and for different people in the community. This is very important when it comes to understanding our different needs of every single citizen in the city, the difference in sectors, the difference in gender, and the difference that women have in and of themselves. We also have to be clear from the use of all the services that the city can provide and has to generate. That's another aspect that we consider that is very important from the Secretariat of Planning, and also how that offer of services has to be conscious because a lot of times that infrastructure cannot provide everything because welfare has to be concrete. It has to be provided in a concrete way. Hello, good morning. Thank you so much. Thank you for the Women's Secretariat for this invitation. I also wanted to help all of our collaborators and the caretakers that are accompanying us, also to the ladies from the consultant council. Well, when we go towards this question, how can territorial planning, incorporate this focus so that we truly have sustainable cities with good mobility, with good public spaces? I think that everything that have been talked about before are very necessary, but I also wanted to talk about the participation of our citizens, citizenship participation, because women also have to participate in order to construct and a city that has a gender focus because women who are diverse, who inhabit the territories, they know what their problems are in terms of the different territories. It's not the same thing to live in Bosa, Kennedy, or San Cristobal, or Usme, or in a territory that is flat, or in a territory that is mountainous, or in Chapinero, where we have more access to institutions, or living in Suba or in Gativa. Every single locality, every single neighborhood has different conditions. So it's very good that technicians design how to make a better city, but we also require women's participation, women's from the participation from diverse women from diverse territories, knowing, getting to know each different point and each different need of every single area of the city. Good morning. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much to the Women's Secretariat, to the Mayor's Office, because of this forum, for this invitation, for having us here, sharing this session that is so productive. I have been talking with some colleagues before, and I cannot begin without expressing the joy and the enthusiasm that this conference, that the 16th conference, regional conference for women that we had about 6 weeks ago in Mexico. And wow, that is one difficult city when it comes to planning and thinking about care, because when we started the work and the thoughts previous to the conferences, we started with a forum about cities that take care, with governments that are subnational, that are locals, that are worried about how to think about care so that women can effectively reduce, redistribute, and enjoy not only the right of taking care of and being cared for, but also of the city as a whole. So obviously, I see Gaffney Cuevas and Ana Moreno, who we were all there about over a month ago, thinking about how we effectively feel about how important care is, not only in national policies, but also mixed in the policies of women themselves, like, especially women that are care providers who know perfectly what we actually need to be able to care with co-responsibility, but also be able to enjoy the right of the use of the city and of public spaces. I'm going to talk about this question that Juliana was talking about as an image. I like to think about care as a new wave of public policy. So if you close your eyes and you think about the great urban centers, I don't know exactly what it's like here in Bogotá, but I have images of capitals where we have these huge buildings of ministries, the Ministry of Health, the Ministry of Education, and have to think a lot about Brasilia, where there's a huge central area where these huge buildings are function in a very different way from each other. And I imagine the planning of care being in that very central area where you have to talk about transportation, about health, about recreation, about international commerce, and where are the women that are actually inserting themselves in sectors like export sectors? And what do we do when we do have to think about care and how to solve problems of care? So, what do I mean by this? This image about how to plan a care system has to do not only with a secretariat, it has to do with the meeting of many sectors, with a planning of cities and of countries from a national level that effectively understand what is required from care so that women can care if they so desire, but in conditions that do not undermine their other rights for their autonomies, for their physical, economic, all of their autonomies. So we have to look at this center of this place of interaction between sectors is absolutely key when we think about the planning for care policies, equality policies, and not just sectorial policies, but that are policies that can actually dialogue about planning so that we can have effective care, efficient care, and that can guarantee women's rights. Without a doubt, we have to get all of these sectors into a dialogue. People who think about transportation, illumination, health, all of the actors who build education policies, policies about recreation, sports, and urban spaces. With this image, I uh, I provide. Continue with my colleague. So thank you so much. I add myself to all of your giving a thanks to all the secretariats and all the administrations um that are here reunited, and especially to everyone who is here as well. This is so interesting and this is so gratifying to be here. So I'm going to continue all of the ideas of all of your reflections, but I want to travel a little bit in time to the past because thinking about urban planning, it's been a long time since urbanism, as it started as a discipline, it was understood as the organization, as the social organization of space. Okay, so this is beautiful and it's very graphic. It's a very graphic way to explain what it is that urbanism does, which is to organize our life in common when it comes to city and society. So when we talk about urbanism, we talk about society. And when we talk about society, we also talk about cities and habitable areas. And in this sense, when I was preparing myself for this presentation, I was thinking about how after the French Revolution, many thinkers came about that were revolutionary who were talking about urbanism as an element of social transformation. And they decided to start a new organization so that we can all live together. And they were the utopian socialists who were very adventurous and they came to America so that they could create that new social organization. And I think that there we create a feminist concept, and they created these common areas where gender equity and equality was primordial. So men and women participated in participated in all these common places in a horizontal organization, not a vertical organization. It was not a patriarchy, and it was obviously not exempt of conflict, but there was one particularly in called New Harmony in the United States that was created and generated what we know today as the law of divorce. It was the first place where the law of divorce was established so that women's equality could be guaranteed. They also shared child rearing and they created this space, which means they created daycare centers, or so the children could be taken care of while people worked. And they also created a space of work, a physical space of work for the elderly, of care for the elderly. This feminist urbanism is worth to be brought back to today because what it refers to is this look of the central space, and it is the space of complexity, which doesn't mean difficulty. It means all the elements that come together for life so that we can all live together in a habitat. So it's a complexity that talks to us about what is diverse, what is common to each of us, what our needs are, and how to create it between all of us together. And I think that that is the virtue of an feminist urban planning so that we can center people, we can center care, and we can center women. I think that this first round of answers installs planning for care because that concept of care, of planning for care, within some of the elements that you have mentioned definitely requires the participation of the care providers, which we know that are mainly women. And the next question, which we want Natalia and Lucia to answer, so that we can know what their experience is in Bogotá, which is an international referent in this aspect. We want to know how management policies for the urban and the rural areas, when you start to practice these policies, how have they actually improved women's life? Because that's what we're talking about. That's what we want, to be able to have a complete society of living lives with satisfaction and well-being. So, Lucia, if you would like to start, and then Natalia. All right, so obviously, I'm not going to talk only about Bogota because this is a process that we have been accompanying since 2020 because all of our colleagues that are here, you can all talk to us about this as well. But I'm going to talk about a situation that Bogota did put into as a point of influx, and that we have been transmitted to the rest of other governments, subnational governments that are also starting on this task of establishing care policies. So, as Elizabeth said, we have to talk about the complexity of what care is and the in situ complexity. So we were also talking about all of these areas in Bogota where clearly women's situations are not similar. And I want to talk about this, which is we obviously work in Latin America and in the Caribbean with countries that also have very enormous complexities when it comes to territory and where their planification, where their planning cannot be carried out from a desk. And this happens everywhere. We have a great diversity in territory when it comes to administration, when it comes to policies. We have to think about federal countries like Mexico, Brazil, Argentina, and we also have to think about how to implement policies in countries that are more central, like Uruguay, Chile, but we also have to think about the different types of competencies in terms of policies for subnational and national policies. Who is responsible for these policies in terms of territory? And we have to think about economical motors for each one of these territories. I was talking to you a few minutes ago about, for example, export sectors when it comes to care sectors when it comes to, for example, Costa Rica, who produces coffee production, and we have to think about women working in production in agriculture in the coffee production, where probably uh, daily work is not the same as it would be in an urban area, and production schedule are not the same standardized schedule where daycare centers are open.
So, how do we think effectively regarding caretaking, also anchored to decisions in economic production in territories like in our continent that's productor of prime materials? It's central. So, how do we relate that to the economic keys to the requirements and caretaking for these women? How do we associate this to uh, Bogota gives us a really interesting example, one of the capitals, biggest capitals in our region, but with a lot of rural areas that are very important and that they need to be taken care of, but in a context of capital district, where the first site is probably more urban, but with a population that's more rural in a capital district that is not insignificant. So how that look on the rural context also has to do, for example, with how far everything is. So in Chile, for example, we work on the south of Chile. We work in a region with some of the biggest proportions of populations for indigenous people, for Mapuche people, where while the distances aren't quite as large, the cosmovision regarding, for example, children getting on a bus that the families didn't drive from that commune, that generated some resistance. So how the solutions that have to do with transportation, with um, getting a health clinic closer, or they have to be anchored in the vision of the people who live in that territory. We didn't win anything if we had buses that would pick up children in different neighborhoods because families weren't um, willing, they didn't have any trust in the transportation system. In the public transportation system, that would effectively drive the children for so many hours away from their home. So how do we think a solution for caretaking that effectively is also considering the beliefs, the possibilities that these families have of feeling, and these women mainly, of feeling safe in the spaces where their children are, their elderly are, and many times it's not just thinking about the rational solution, but it's also thinking about the adapted solution to those territories. And not to mention looking at the Caribbean, where you have islands in a logic that's completely different to our continental countries. And I think, for example, of this ship that in alliance with the government of Brazil last year, they were in the rivers of the Amazon, driving around and sailing around, and leaving this print of what caretaking implies and how, in a location that is a set of islands or rivers or populations that are quite isolated, if you can't reach them only via water, like canoes, ships, and this transportation that's not exactly urban, there are caretaking requirements that need to be thought of, like the people from the United States say, out of the box, because they don't answer to the same solutions that we are more, say, they're closer to us from a look that's more urban. So how do we effectively look at those territories, look at the needs, look at the populations, the cultures, the cosmovision that we have there, to obviously respect and guarantee women's rights, understanding that not through the same solutions or the same offerings can we guarantee the right to caretaking for every person. And I'm going to leave that there. Thank you so much. Well, I'm going to go a little more towards the technical side of the question, towards territorial authorities that I represent, but adding to what Elizabeth and Lucia were saying, and especially through the urbanistic concept and this urban politics that we consider from the secretary, and our instruments that we release from the secretary is the ordering plan in terms of coordination. Our biggest challenge here is to have this intersection between what is territorially required by the communities, by the citizenship, and what they are bringing in the different exercises with our capacities as public sector, the physical capacities of the territory. And that's where I think where the ordering plan and the secretary with between the secretary and planning, which is the master plan for caretaking and social services, they generate a certain set of very important tools to definitely bring the solutions that are needed in each territory. So for example, the ordering plan from its birth started thinking about proximity and how the different sectors of the city had, as you mentioned, uh, m- repeatedly, that each sector has different needs, these different conditions, different populations, and definitely how if we have a goal from the planning secretary to reduce the need for traveling and to create a series of services that are as close as possible, then we're generating an important reduction in a lot of breaches in transportation, time, ideally generating the infrastructure, which is where I would stop a little further on, because, well, on paper, everything looks great, right? And the real challenge that we have from the institution side is to make those strategic plans real, to be able to provide a service that's adequate. And that's where I think policies as a tool, like an ordering plan, start to generate challenges that are interinstitutional, that are very important, which is have a navigational chart where we're clear on what our challenges are. And definitely, as Elizabeth was saying, so that we can articulate between sectors in the best possible way, and having policies and in terms of transportation, the care blocks that are done through this Women's Secretariat. And from the planning side, how can we support you in terms of population requirements and effectively that you can give and provide the service? But I wouldn't want to reduce it to something that complex, to something that's just one challenge, but that articulation between public policy and the dream that we have on paper and a decree and an instrument. Um, Truthfully, us from the public sector, we need the coordination to make it real efficiently so that you as citizens can take advantage of it and make use of that benefit finally, which is we have as a responsibility to provide. We've talked about the need of a situational diagnosis, of being very understanding of what is happening in the territories and the perceptions and beliefs that people have regarding that policy that we're going to use, and that it needs a translation to be turned into a technical instrument. And like all translations, there may be some information lost, and of which we're very aware of in the public sector to reduce these breaches that Natalia is referring to. So in terms of planning, what we would like to ask Marisol and Elizabeth is, what strategies have proved most effective to reduce those gender breaches in issues like mobility and services and women's access to urban spaces and hyper-urban spaces. And in the idea that you've set for us of how reality is more complex every time, and considering environmental sustainability, which is priority at the time. So if you want to start, Marisol. Thank you, Juliana. Well, the questions is a hard one. This question's hard. Um, we have some examples here in Bogota that are very important, which is the district system of caretaking, which has been implemented by Claudia Lopez, but it has been a fight from women leaders for 20 years. Claudia, what she did was comply with a promise that she made to women at that forum that women did. We decided, we chose, we proposed, and we decide. So it has been a bid that has been very important, and it has been continued with the new mayor's office, and we hope it will continue to do so during the next. Uh, and it was an over 20-year fight of the women in Bogota, diverse women in Bogota. Another very important example is the organizing plan, and we have the representative for planning here. And in territorial planning in Bogota, which happened for the first time with Claudia, we have a gender focus for the first time. We have a territory planning, and this plan is supposed to last 12 years. It can go longer if we don't reach an agreement. It can go to 16 or 20 years. And this is a roadmap that we need to follow and the next mayors need to follow. It's very important that we demand that in the territory planning, we don't only have a gender focus, but we have also have 45 care blocks in the caretaking plan. In Claudia's government was 20, now we have 25, and we need to demand the other 20 to reach the 45 that are currently in the pod. And if we can do more, that would be great. So these instruments are very important to have mobility, safe public spaces, sustainability. But as our partner here, Natalia, was saying, they're in paper. We need to demand them. We need to keep working on it. Another example is, of course, the care blocks within the caretaking district system. These care blocks, we provide services, focuses women who are caretakers, but also people who they are taking care of. So children under 5 years old. They also included teenagers because that was also necessary, elderly people, people with disabilities. And it's also education for men. By you can learn how to be a caretaker. And society and caretaking labor has to be shared so that women have time. Like this forum is saying, women's time is so important, is what we're lacking most. And resources like cash and things like that, but also time, fun time, time to relax. These tools are key. And I would like to tell you of an experience that we have right now because, see, all of the policies are created on paper, but they need to be built continuously. They are not created magically. No, there needs to be a follow-up. They need to be questioned. They need to be improved. And we need to ensure its sustainability. So we're diagnosing some participation in the care blocks. We do interviews and we understand that users, it has changed their lives from 0 to 100 to make use of these activities in the care blocks, to be able to come to the trainings, to learn how to ride a bike, to bring clothes to the laundry so that their husbands can participate in um, learning to take care of and brushing their children's hair, making breakfast, take them to school. So that participation diagnosis is to see what's missing. We know that the services are wonderful, but the fact is we also need to access to caretaking, to the care blocks, and access is sometimes not quite as effective. In the pod, we also set up strategies for mobility, and it's great to have the services and the equipment, but we need to be able to get there. Universal accessibility is essential. Having ramps, having sidewalks. We go to Chapinero on the top in Tito Garzon, and there's no sidewalks. But if I'm walking, I can jump. But if I have like a baby carrier or someone in a wheelchair, if you live a little bit more far away and walking is half an hour, then you need some public transportation. You need circular routes, transportation that are taking us from here to Titos Garzon. It'll be over half an hour. There are people who are coming from the rural areas of Chapinero. As we know, Chapinero is not just urban, there's a rural area. And they told us it takes 2 hours for them to get there. It's not just 2 hours, they need to take three modes of transportation. That's 9,000 pesos to get there, 9,000 more to go back home. And also they had to walk, take the bus, get off the bus, take the different bus. So it would take them about 2 hours to get there. And it becomes necessary to review that transportation for caretakers or services for caretaking that are more dispersed. I know the secretary is working on that. But what I'm getting at is that there needs to be a permanent evaluation of these policies that we created, so they're not stuck on paper, and we keep evaluating how we can implement them and how we can articulate them. As my colleagues here, making that articulation is essential, and not just for institutions, but we also need to articulate Secretariat for Women, Habitat, Culture, Transportation, economic development, recreation and sport, culture. And that's how it's important to learn that the secretaries have their own roles and that none of them are exempt from having that gender focus and having that articulation to make these policies effective. And I would like to highlight what Lucia was saying before about diversity in our territories and how in Bogota we have this great luck of having the district system for caretaking, the care blocks, the pod, the ordering plan. However, other territories where we're also working in, like Mediatrato, Choco, in the Pacific coast, we don't have roads, we have no equipment. It's a river. That's the main mode of transportation for food. The connection or the barrier really is where life is taking place in a way that's completely different. And surely the solutions for these territories are not the same that for cities. So using these participation exercises and diagnostics so that they can tell us from the territories what they need, how they work. As Lucia was saying, a woman who is a farmer, she doesn't have the same schedules that we have in the city. Someone who picks up plantains or who lives in Choco, who spends her days making bitter, they don't have the same schedule and the needs that we have here in the city. So I'll go back to the first subject I was talking about. It's very important to have public policies that also have a gender focus. In Bogota, we have a lot of cattle, but let's not discount women, diverse women in territory so that we can continue evaluating their conditions and what are the best solutions to those conditions. And that so that we can work with the institutions, with private institutions, with the general community, with men, so that we can all build together. All right, so I'm gonna pick up from when you left off. I couldn't agree more with the idea of the dream and how territorializing the dream, how make it real. I have a reference, which is a Barcelona reference, but as I've also had the luck of living a part of my life in Latin America, I also think that I'm going to territorialize this a little bit more with this land. um, I would say that when we talk about this urbanism, there are two elements of how to territorialize them. And we would talk about this yesterday, which is scale, which is something architects use a lot. Scale proportion. For me, it's a category that's super useful, is understanding scale in ecosystems where everything is interconnected, like two references that will help you put an eye on your territory and look at everything that's happening there. So scaling this unit that lets us touch on life spaces, life that is lived. What's the neighborhood? I don't know what you call them, neighborhood zones that have specific characteristics. They have a construction, they have spaces that are free, some roads, they have a personality and a history, a genealogy, their own history. So starting from this enclave, the neighborhood allows us to territorialize and adapt that plan that is on paper to the day-to-day life of the space. And in that sense, proximity, seen from a perspective of things being near and from the neighborhood perspective is fundamental. So when you were talking about participation, there is a social subject, social political subject, which is all of us who are here. And we live in an area, we live in a neighborhood. It's a subject that we understand more easily when we talk about community, but that community needs to be built every day. It cannot be discounted. Without it, you can't have good urban planning. So it's a knitting that we need to take care of it. It's an weaving of relationships, affections, of families to avoid fear, to avoid making the other an enemy, a threat. For that, we need to have an active construction. The plan also has to go hand in hand with that caretaking and that community work, that work with the community that you identify with, the one that you feel you belong to and you have pride from belonging to it, and joy and enjoyment. And also talking about friendship. What can this help us with in urbanism in this community work is understanding that friendship, closeness are elements that can also help us make relationships that are more constructive, rich, the areas and the neighborhoods where we live. So I think this work is very, very important. Actually, in some places, we're already talking about policies of subjectivity because urban planning has always had a tendency to be located in departments that we call institutions on rock the street. So we need to make them a little more soft, sweeter, so we don't not only need to talk about the rational policies or efficiency of technical rigor, which of course we do have to, but also making space for subjectivity, for emotion, for perception, for needs that are tied to our day-to-day life. And as I was saying, it cannot be seen from above. It's from the bottom to the top, not from the top to the bottom. And when we talk about gender, which is about talking about women and caretaking, it's also talking about men, about children, about all of us. It's a universal category and it helps us to see this complexity as a whole. And when we talk about time, which is also universal, we all have time, right? The time of our lives, it's also something that we share. And this category also helps us to see everything that is happening in day-to-day relationships, day-to-day life. So introducing gender and time in urban planning gives us the capacity to have this view of everything that happens for each person in our lives. And this is where I have a word that I think a couple of days ago we set on the table, which is the idea of interdependencies. So life is interdependent. We need each other. We need to take care of each other. And that way, neighborhoods and communities and the people and introducing them and their participation into urbanism is key. That is going to make us a lot closer and efficient into urban planning. Elizabeth mentions on closing. Oh, and with this applause, thank you, Elizabeth, for this last part. That's so inspiring because you're putting on the table this issue that we've been reflecting and feminism has been reflecting on, which is the nucleus of caretaking, which is building a social weaving, overcoming individualism, making communities, and being aware of interdependency and the issues that Bogota has had to build these goals that Marisol has been talking about, to think about an ordering plan that has gender as a component that makes it different and to allows us to plan a city. So in that sense that you have been making this more complex, the intersectionality has been present and intersectoriality has been present to plan a city. And this last question takes on the governance model because all of these concepts require a development through a structure like the state. So I would like to ask Natalia, and again you, Elizabeth, and Lucia, which is the idea is you're the first one who is going to intervene. How do we move forward in a government territorial planning that takes women into account, that as we've talked about is diverse, women live in different places, they have different characteristics, integrating this environmental sustainability issue that we've also talked about recently, but also the gender focus and centering decision making, which is making women be centered. So, Lucia, I'll let you go first, and then Natalia, and lastly, Elizabeth. And Juliana, thank you very much. Well, I would highlight certain issues that have to do with governance. We published recently a joint document with the PNUDO, Mujeres and the OIT, and of course the CEPAL, where we highlight definitely 5 dimensions that are fundamental to a public policy with participation and taking into account women's needs with the objective of gender equality and governance, normative framework, and the types of services that are required, intersectionality and the intercultural view, strategies for financing, and I'm going to talk about this in a second, the importance of information systems. So I'm referring to what Natalia was saying just now, which is this view that is a little more with a horizon and with an aspiration that's more universal and then for certain quality standards. So what can we do from the public policy specifically? And there's a lot we can do. So first of all, a participative government, listening, one that has the intention of understanding. That doesn't mean we can do everything immediately, that every single person that has met at that table wants or requires, right? But it does mean that there is an intention of listening and understanding, because there's also effectively a way to make public policy is one of the hardest things, like changing culture, like changing a view that says that women need to stay at home, that men uh, are providers, and men is the one who needs to have a priority to go to the job market. So since women knows how to take care of the true nature that we never really know where it comes from, she stays at home. She cooks. She brushes the kid's hair. She takes her to the doctor, and she changes diapers better. And we don't know where that knowledge came from. That men don't seem to be affected by. So when we have this governance for participation listening, understanding that public policy instruments a lot of the time fall back into this vision of men provider, women caretaker, and that is also something that we need to transform. So understanding that while territories are diverse and needs are different, what we can't do is take a step back in rights guarantee and in quality of services and offers of public policy. We cannot separate the quality of what is offered, separate from one municipality to a national government. And of course, we have quality standards that have to do with caretaking services, health services, education. They need to have an even level. And what does that imply? Implies it, the
we consider that these deliberative concepts are in being thinking a little bit about outside the box and some methodologies and actors that are generally not feeling that they are in the same space. So last Saturday, we were being accompanied in a space that was specifically a theme for this year. And the idea is that on the 26th and the 27th, we all choose the following subjects. And I'm taking advantage of the that we have the caretakers that are here with us so that they can also accompany us to the cycles of to the deliberative cycles of planning. Thank you so much. I think that this deliberative planning is very interesting. When we talk about governance, I think that we can talk about the recognition of knowledge, of each of our knowledge, of each of the knowledges that everybody has. I think that we can rescue and bring forward all of our knowledge from our living experiences, from our history, from our lived experience, from our trajectory, and we have to put them at the service of not just a technical knowledge, but it's a biographical knowledge of our own history, of our own desires, and of our own vital projects. So I think that this governance, this recognition of a space, this that what you just mentioned, which is within between different equals, because we all live in a habitat, and I think it's very interesting and the idea is to be able to open a conversation. It's not a debate. It's not a dialogue. It's a space where we meet so that we all can reflect from their own position. And we can, as you said, have this space to listen, a generous space, so that we can come into other people's lives and they can also come into our lives. In that way, we can totally create knowledge that is a lot more complete about what we have to include in urban planning. So I would say that when it comes to governance modeling, planning, it has to be very participatory. So what I want to point out, and I am congratulating this collective look that we have here, especially with this fantastic public, we have to help administration, public administrations, to not be afraid, to not be afraid to listen, to not be afraid to sit down with the people, and to not be afraid to share their ideas, and to not be afraid of contradiction, because that is what we need. And there are times when opening up to the public and to the community, opening up to participation, when it is not just in a consulting aspect, but because it is a participation that joins all of us, it can sometimes create a little bit of fear because you're opening yourself to something that you don't know. It's a construction that is in process, but the validity of this participatory urbanism is an urbanism where we can all talk from our lives and can create a joint construction, a construction for all and from all. I think that that is the best way because we are convinced that if we participate, then we have to reach a consensus. But consensus, that word means with giving your permission that we are going to point out things that make sense to each all of us, things consensus with sense. But I think that we can go further if we don't necessarily try to reach a consensus, reaching a unanimous decision, but instead that we come to agreements that are viable and that are common but that because sometimes when we agree on everything, we're not able to commit to those sorts of things because of our own capacities. And I think that that can really generate participatory spaces that we are not afraid of, and that allow us to talk about what is technically possible, what is technically desirable, and what we can actually do, helping each other out. Thank you so much. So, as to close this panel, I am going to share 3 conclusions. I think that we have had an invitation to think about with imagination and with innovation, and that requires the make our realities more complex and compare with other experiences, including the ones that the speakers have pointed out. So the word that we aspire to includes many subjects that, if they have a trajectory in discussion, we can qualify them as emergent, such as the discussion that this forum is proposing about time and its relationship with care. So that undoubtedly is a transformation, a social transformation that has to be reflected on the space, on territory planning, and public policy, in spite of rigidity that the state may have at some instances, but in order to make it more malleable, the speakers have shared the idea of a participatory governance where we can involve diverse knowledges and the different experiences from different people. We also have to think with being very progressive. So, thinking about being progressive and being sustainable, which is something that is also present in the way that this administration has been thinking about the care system. And lastly, I wanted to thank, obviously, Elizabeth, Lucia, Marisol, and Natalia, and to all of you who have been so generous by listening to us and also with the applause. Thank you so much. Thank you so much to our panel, and thank you so much to our moderator, Juliana, Subsecretary of Care and of Equality Policies from the Women's Secretariat. Thank you so much for being here today. And well, to all of you, thank you for your time. We are going to continue with our sessions today. Remember that today we have different activities in panel number 1. So, territory planning, care, time, and gender. There is a very interesting conversation about climate change. So, for everyone who is also following us through the media and through social networks, something very interesting is coming, and we are closing with panel 2, mobility. In the terms of women's rights. And in the afternoon, we're going to talk about urban design with a gender focus. And we are going to close our second day with time policies from theory to practice. We are also thankful to our graphic storytelling, which is advancing more and more as more subjects are being put forward. So we're stating this graphic memory of everything that is happening here with the support of BID and UN Women, who are providing this exercise for us. And Crepes and Waffles is also here, which is an ally for the Seal of Equality for the Women's Secretariat. And it has been linked to this international forum, which will offer a delicious coffee for everyone who is here. And for everyone who is getting here, we will be here all day. Our live transmission is through sdmujer.gov.co, our social media, so that you can follow us and be up to date with our programming. We will have a journey through Ciudad Bolívar at Manitas so that we can see firsthand the experiences that have been had in the first. Care block in Ciudad Bolívar, which is called Manitas. Now we are coming forward with climate change. So this is not just an environment crisis; it is also an inequality crisis. So extreme climate change does not affect everyone in the same way. It affects mostly women who are vulnerable, who are poor, and who live in rural areas, and they experience them in the worst way because they have higher care responsibilities and they have less resources. So Silvia Calderon from SEI in Stockholm is helping us understand why answers to climate change have to have a gender focus. Silvia is an expert in climate economics, and she has been the environment directorate in the planning department in Colombia. So please let's welcome Silvia. with a great applause, our invited expert today about climate change. Oh my God. Climate is changing, and this change generates impacts that are very different. For example, the increase in global temperatures, the changes in precipitation, rainfall, the changes in extreme events in their frequency and magnitude impact very differently the north and the south in the globe. Areas, the urban areas, and the rural areas, men and women. This impact increases loads that structurally already exist in our society. However, in many occasions, these loads increase because of climate change when they are accompanied by the empowerment of science, of information, and of data, can turn into power. Today, I'm going to talk to you about how, as women, can turn loads into power. For this, let's travel to Bolivia. Let's take a plane and let's travel south and let's get to Bolivia. At the south of Bolivia, there is a cuenca that is called the Cuenca of the Tupiza River, where over 30,000 people live that dedicate themselves mainly to agriculture and to cattle farming. These people have problems to water sources. So, as we see here, they have to travel daily to be able to obtain water for every single one of their activities, productive and domestic. 27.5% of the rural homes have to go get water from their primary source. And when it comes to the poorest homes, this is a 56% amount. What does this mean? That over 178 hours a year have to be dedicated to access water. That is close to 22 work schedules a year. This time, as we know, as it happens in Colombia, it falls mainly on women. In the studies that we have carried out from the Environmental Institute of Stockholm, it shows that over 40% of women, of the time spent on this is taken on by women versus 30% for men. And the rest of it it falls onto women when it comes to their dedication to the family. Clearly, this limited access that because of the effects of climate change is made worse and worse because climate change increases extreme events like droughts, and therefore people have to dedicate more time to find water, which is become gets further and further from their homes. This causes effects on their health. So a lot of the time they have to access water that is contaminated, but it also increases domestic loads, especially over women. The institute, the Environmental Institute for Stockholm, has evaluated this cuenca very specifically. On one hand, it has made a model of the water sources so that we can understand how climate change can affect in the future the distribution of water, but it has also been accompanied by a study, demographic study, so that we can understand this load, this additional load that climate change is generating on women. But we have also sat down with communities so that with this information, planning, strategic planning of the use of water resources in the Cuenca can be informed in terms of gender gaps, and we can propose actions so that when we manage water resources, we can reduce these gaps. So the plan for management of this Cuenca has an entire focus on gender, and this includes education, working with men so that we can transform roles and that this load can be equally distributed, and specific actions so that women can make decisions about infrastructure that is going to allow the time that they dedicate to be able to access water. So let's continue telling the story, traveling now from Bolivia to Colombia, to the north of South America, and particularly to El Cesar. And as you know, El Cesar has a great concentration of the production of carbon in Colombia. Over 50% of carbon extraction happens in El Cesar. And Colombia is actually one of the countries that exports the highest amounts of carbon globally. It's the fourth country with the highest export. But if we this goal, perhaps you have heard that we have to carry out the necessary actions so that the planet does not heat up over 1.5 degrees over the temperature that was before the pre-industrial era. So it's estimated that countries have to stop producing and consuming carbon to 2024. So a study that we talked about during Climate Week in New York indicates that today countries are planning to produce more petroleum and more carbon than they were planning to produce 2 years ago. So we are completely unaligned with that goal. However, for countries to be able to be empowered towards the transition, energetic transition, we have to understand today local economies that depend on petroleum and carbon. How are they structured? What are the gender roles that we see there? In the case of El Cesar in 2021, one of the companies that was the main company producing coal, Prodeco, it unexpectedly closed its mines in 2021. That allowed somehow to see a lab of what the transition, of what energetic transition is about, and if we have designed it properly, and if it is just or unjust. The closing of the mine of La Jagua of Imbirico at El Cesar caused massive unemployment and it deepened family crisis. How? When the mine was operational, many of formal employment had were in the hands of men. Women had economic activities and informal activities in production and services associated to the mine, and therefore there was also a gap when it came to salaries. Women also didn't have the opportunities to participate in decision making when it came to mining in their territory or the operation of the mine or management of environment impact or social impacts of the mine, but they would only participate through community activism, many times under threat from illegal actions in the territory because there is a huge activity from illegal actors in this territory. So when the mine was closed, they were both impacted, men and women. So men lost their jobs and women lost the opportunity for economic income, and they started a process of emotional load, an increase of emotional load for women especially. So energetic transitions, meaning to work on how we can think of a world where economic activity goes further from oil and petroleum, coal. We have to understand the differences in the local areas so that this can be a transition that is just. And these kind of studies help us inform these processes a lot better in order to find an economy that when it doesn't depend on fossil fuels, it doesn't also exacerbate the gaps that already exist. So let's travel further to understand how environmental subjects and this vision of climate impacts and of an economy that is resilient to climate are related to urban context and to mobility. Let's travel to Africa, and particularly to the east of Africa, Kenya, to understand how transportation and sustainability have not been designed in the cities of the world with a gender focus. In the case of Nairobi, which is the capital of Kenya, it's a city of close to 5 million people, and public transportation, have not been designed to meet the transportation needs for women, which are very complex because women in Nairobi, but also in Bogota and in other cities in Latin America, are women that have many activities, many economical activities, that of the home, care activities, those outside of the home, and many of them have a very active participation in the community. So to be able to answer and meet these needs when it comes to mobility that entail many moving from one place to another several times a day, but with the efficiency in systems of transportation, it becomes so much more difficult. In a study that we carried out also from Environmental Institute of Stockholm, we also found that in the case of Nairobi and in other African cities, they have access to resources of transportation that are less expensive. So in the home, if a man has a motorcycle, he's the one that uses the motorcycle, but women have to use public transportation. But because this is inefficient, this creates a series of challenges so that women can meet their responsibilities, their economic responsibilities. And here we see some challenges. For example, the time that women dedicate to transportation, not just waiting, but also the time in traffic jams, and also the high cost of transportation because you have to take transportation several times a day when they are not integrated transportation system. So it's an additional cost every time she comes and goes from her home. So additionally, women are confronted with other problems like contamination. A person that spends so much time in public transportation is exposed to contamination, and those transportations, because they're gas transportation types and diesel, and they do pollute, is a lot more exposed to disease.
but also the need to face these problematics. Now, to finish the stories, we're coming back to Colombia. We're coming back from Africa to Colombia, to a region in the department of Caldas. We're going to talk about water again and management of water in the cuenca at the Rio Campo Alegre in Caldas. Here, women are facing very similar breaches that are found in every rural area in Colombia. We believe that nearly 12% of women don't go to school, of girls, they are not receiving an education. We also see that only a percentage of their work is paid. So employment-wise, about 74% of the rural population is employed versus less than 30% of women. And when the head of household is a woman, poverty is a lot higher. This vision of the rural area in Colombia is a vision of what women are facing in Campo Alegre, in Caldas. However, we've also noticed that when women with data and with scenarios where science is presented to them, and not just the science based on satellites and complex models, but citizen science, the possibility of women to be empowered with this information is so high. Thanks to these types of studies where there's a community participation that is very, very relevant, women have been able to participate and to have an impact over what is happening in their territories. So this is coffee producing place where there's a lot of people dedicated to production of coffee, and women have agreed to accessing resources to be able to expand their work in the restoration of their water, thanks to the fact that they know what is happening in their territories, not only because of their communities, but the information that is generated by science. They've been able to have an impact on restoring these water basins so that there's just key for the production of coffee, but also for the availability of water in the territory. These are 4 stories of how the load can be turned into empowerment options where science has a fundamental role to play. Because when we are in a participation or negotiation, for example, in Howard and Birico, they find that they have different information, asymmetrical information. We can bring them all to the same level of information through studies, through information. The conversation is a lot more productive and it's very different. That's the role that we have here from the Institute, from the Environment Institute in Stockholm, in the policies and in the practice. We are an institute with a global presence. We have 8 centers all over the planet. The newest one is in Bogotá, that covers the entire Latin American region. And for Latin America, then, we're working to accompany the very deep transformations that our Latin American region is going through. Transformations associated to climate change, to the loss of biodiversity, but also to the need to move forward, to transition to a just transition, accompanied by the great cultural environmental value that Latin America has. We're currently working in 14 countries in Latin America with different projects regarding water resources, impact of climate change, bioeconomics, energetical transitions, promoting the agenda of the Sustainable Development Objectives, and we keep growing. Now to finish, I wanted to let you know that we are a team that is very diverse, interdisciplinary, of men and women who work every day with the most scientific rigor and ethical rigor to look, once again, to have an impact through science and local agendas and the way that we make decisions and the implementation of public policy. Now we have the privilege of being led by 4 amazing women that you can see on the screen right now. But we represent a diverse team of men and women who are wonderful, working now in closing, in proving that science can be a vehicle that amplifies female voices and that it strengthens that leadership that we're representing in environmental and sustainable development. The weight of power is not a slogan, it's a path that we can follow if we can walk through it together. And that is an invitation that we want to extend to you to finish this presentation. Thank you very much. Thank you, Sylvia, for this really interesting conversation that is going to for sure leave a lot of learning for all of us talking about climate change. It's time for us to take a break to have a delicious coffee, courtesy of Crepes and Waffles, who are with us today. We are on the left side of the stage, organized manner. Please proceed to get your coffee that they are going to give us. Remember that Crepes and Waffles is an ally of the Equality Seal of the Secretary for Equality of the Women in Bogotá. And we have allied to offer this delicious coffee to all of you. Those of you who are live right now through our social media, we'll see you in 10 minutes. We'll be back in 10 minutes with our morning block. Thank you so much, everybody. Thank you for coming back for this special day that we have ready for all of you. Please take a seat, go back to your seats, and let's continue our conversation today. In Bogota, women do more than 1.86 million journeys every day. If 75% of those journeys are associated to caretaking, and using public transportation in a greater proportion than men, with a 57.2% of the total journeys daily in 2023. That's why Bogota has prioritized the reduction of traveling time for women through projects like Transmicable in Ciudad Bolívar, and has reduced journeys that used to last up to 3 hours to 13 minutes. We also highlight the next Transmicable San Cristobal, which reduces from 35 to 10 minutes. So we invite you to listen to the next conversation panel that is going to be very interesting. Thank you, people who are at the top of the room, to come back to your seats so that we can clearly listen to this conversation that is going to be very interesting to talk about mobility and women's rights. Where here is Carolina Fernandez, researcher from the Universidad Nacional de Colombia, Vanessa Rodriguez Següez, Director of External Relationships Public Metro from Quito, Ecuador. We also have Juan David Villamarin, Chief of Office Management at the Mobility Secretariat, Bogotá, Colombia. Catherine Maya Roa, Leadership and Ciclovia and Bogotá in Bicycle in Bogotá, Colombia. And moderator, we have Juanita Bernal, Specialist in Gender and Diversity at the Inter-American Bank and Development, and Gender Subdirector at the National Planning Department, and as a consulting in education and first childhood. Welcome, everyone. The panel is yours. Good morning still to everyone here. Thank you for being here, for staying after the coffee. I'm really happy to be able to be a part of this panel. I would like to first, of course, thank the panelists, and to highlight that the mobility issue has been mentioned in many of the panels that we've had since yesterday and today, and it's not accidental. Mobility, I think, is one of the issues that influence precisely what is calling us here to this event, which is time, and particularly women's time. I was sitting over there with Ruth. I was talking to her about what mobility implies, how much time. Marisa was saying it at the panel this morning, and there are people who can take up to 3 modes of transportation to get here. How long does that take? How long did it take you to get here? How many modes of transportation of heart? How much did you have to walk? What does it imply to move through the city? And not just by use, but also we were talking with Ruth about how do women participate in this mobility system? How do they participate in employment? How do they participate in a safe environment? And that's what's calling us today to this panel. And I would like to start with Carolina, from your experience in research in many entities, and also for Vanessa and Juan David. But let's start with Carolina. How would you how to design systems that are related to women's experiences and diverse women, that, as we've been saying in the previous panels, that women that have different situations, and particularly in those mobility needs that are related to caretaking, so that that right to time in cities can be transformed for women. Well, first of all, thank you and good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for the invitation. It's a pleasure to share with you in this panel. And regarding the question itself, in the same questions, you have the basis to answer this. The ingredients that we require to have a planning say one that's more better thought out towards mobility systems aimed towards women and answering to our needs. Something very important here, even though we're talking about mobility and caretaking, which I will emphasize on later on, is that women, we not only take care, but we can also have multiple roles that can be happening at the same time. Or there are women who are exclusively caretakers, but that's not the case for every woman. And most of women, besides caretaking, they're also in the productive chain of working and doing many other things, right? And it's important to take into account that we're talking about a diversity of women and understanding that diversity of women, not just as that within ourselves, there are moments in life when we're going to have different diversities, right? So I'm not the same person that today than I when I was 10 or when I'm gonna be when I'm 60. And these stages of life mark a different way that we handle and live the city and how we move, also with disability conditions that can be temporary or permanent. If I fall, I could end up in a temporary disability condition that could last a week, a day, an hour, depending on how bad the fall was. So it's also important within that context to see it from the point of view of the data. The data allows us to see what is happening and to have a landscape of who the women are and how they are represented in mobility today. And the last mobility interview research tried to include the caretaking mobility within the research. That's a basis, one of the few mobility interviews that takes that into account, but I think we're still far away. And our caretaking mobility right now is defined as accompanying someone. And it's a lot more than just accompanying a person, which is there's a famous researcher, her name is Ines Maria Sanchez. She coins the term caretaking mobility, and when we have to consider traveling for shopping, how many of these have to do with caretaking? If they're caretaking for shopping, what loads do I have? Do I have a child? Do I have a package? What is happening with that shopping? And the Universidad Nacional, which is where I'm from, we're talking about the intersection with caretaking mobility and elderly people, because we found that elderly people not only are subjects of caretaking, but also in our society, they are caretakers too. So when there is a grandmother in a home, this person ends up assuming the basic caretaking roles like taking someone. But there are many travels that are added here, many journeys. So we've even started questioning if us in our context in Latin America, specifically in Bogotá, we need to understand caretaking mobility in the same way that Baladiaga did, or if we need to go even a little bit further to understand what's happening. And something very important here is when we talk about mobility systems, women are very sensitive to the walking and the public transportation because it's where caretaking is actually happening. We travel in public transportation and we do it walking. Most caretaking travels are associated to walking, and it's a good thing that in the data we also count journeys that are lower than 15 minutes, which is the one that end up adding up more. And this time then we end up moving from one place to the other. How does it work? And how can we use it differently? And in closing, I would like to add that normally transportation planning, we talk about that transportation time is a loss. So there's a researcher from Chile, Paula Soto Villagran. We don't consider that time traveling as lost time because while we're in the bus, maybe we're using that to sleep, recover time. Maybe we're using it to make the phone calls that we haven't done, to schedule appointments, or take care of many other caretaking tasks that we couldn't do while we were in our productive activities and not non-productive. Catalina, thank you very much. And I think you bring up a very interesting point, this last one, and that is that transportation systems and mobility is an alive transportation. Things are still happening. And this opens the space, Vanessa, for me to ask you, from your experience with the metro in Quito, how do you think that this transportation mode, the metro, that makes mobility easier, how do you live that experience, and how does it answer to those women's needs? Well, I agree with something very critical, and it's the fact of information. I think a good base for any sort of public design inclusive transportation system is to have the users at the center of it, understanding what the mobility patterns are within cities. And I'm going to talk about from the metro experience in Quito, which is a new system. It started being planned in 2009. The construction started in 2013. And in 2023, we started operating continuously. So it has been a very long process that has taken a long time and a lot of public investment. And our idea is to see this transportation system as a tool to materialize people's right to time. So in the time we've been operating, we're in a space where in bus it takes like an hour and a half. And from using the metro, that same time, that same journey can be done in 34 minutes. It's an underground track, so it's a time saver, and people are using it. Our first primary users are women, and as we've seen in general, in many cases, we are the ones that use public transportation the most. And the system from its birth needs to think about that most users are probably going to be women, and the way men and women relate to each other in the public space depends on gender roles that we are assigned. Traditionally, men have some mobility patterns that are shorter and more direct, while women have mobility patterns that are a lot longer, and we move through the city through many parts of the city in like a star almost, for many reasons, for caretaking reasons, work, and also during different times of the day. So we have used the city a lot more, and we use different modes of transportation. Another characteristic of how women move through a city is that sometimes we prefer trajectories that are longer but safer. So how does the metro incorporate all of this reality into the system design? I'm going to talk to you about three, only three, basically three lines so that I don't talk too much. First, tracing the lines for the metro. So where the metro circulates has to do with productive activities, cultural activities, access to health systems, and also with intermodality. We have stations where a person uses the metro and they can connect to other transportation systems in the city, and that helps a lot to these connections that women have within the city that aren't quite as linear. Another way that we have to incorporate in the design of the metro is to have stations with universal accessibility. We have 15 stations, all of them are underground, and all of them have an elevator, escalators, information, visual information, braille, and this helps to reduce the logistic charge of caretaking. Because if a person is traveling with someone who has a wheelchair, for example, it's easier for them that the infrastructure allows their movement, or that the trains have exclusive spaces for um, wheelchairs or for the elderly. And a third way to incorporate the right to time and gender perspective in the design of transportation is from its inception for it to be an inclusive transportation, thinking about the needs of women specifically. I saw the picture of Kenya and what we don't want, right? It's there. And the idea to design a transportation system is that from its inception, it thinks about s- different strategies for women and men. I can go a little longer on that so I don't monopolize the panel. And thank you, Vanessa. And thank you. You mentioned something that is also surely very important for the mobility secretary that has a challenge of thinking of mobility from many dimensions. You talk about the intermodality, and Juan David from the secretariat, you have these challenges. how have you answered to these needs? And how have you thought from a secretariat the way to answer to these needs of women regarding mobility? Well, first of all, thank you so much for the invitation. Good morning, everyone here. I would like to highlight a couple of things. First of all, we're living in a moment that I would say, I'm going to use the expression golden in terms of transportation planning, because for the first time in a long time, it's led by women. And the mobility sector is not a secret to anyone. It's a sector that its planning has been mainly masculine. So our Secretariat for Mobility, our Transmillennium manager, they have a brilliant trajectory in transportation. And linking it to your question and what my colleagues have said, the city has a lot of information. We have an observatory for mobility that is pioneering in Latin America. Our intelligence for mobility creates information that's amazing in dimensions of caretaking, disabilities, gender, childhood, elderly, but the data can be a little raw. When I got here at the beginning of the year, last year, I talked to my wonderful gender team that I have in my office, and I said, I want to present you with a challenge. How can we make this entity and this sector take all of these information that looks so cold and take them to the field to do things with people? And I did the same thing with public policy that handle women, gender, disabilities, among others, LGBTI policies. So these policies are usually so general that you don't see the impact that it has in people's lives. So answering your question, we gave ourselves the opportunity to test a number of things in the field, and with these conversations with the citizens and interested groups like people with disabilities, women, children, people from the LGBTI community, we've started implementing projects that can actually answer to these needs of the people in the field. So security, most victims that we have uh, due to car accidents, due to excessive speed, are women and children, due to bad behavior within the road. So the neighborhoods where this is happening, the caretaking, it's all elderly people, women, children who are being victims of this. So we're implementing measures. So from last year, we talked about caretaking mobility strategy. We won't have the time, but I would like for you to get to know it, because we started reviewing the neighborhoods, the locations that are critical for women, children, particularly for road security, that are tied also to care blocks. Because we noticed that as a mobility sector, they answer to a number of issues, but the problematics that in proximity issues, men, children, and women have, and they are tied to security. And we're working this year in Rafael Uribe Molinos and another one in San Cristobal, and we hope to increase it and scale it to make better solutions. So regarding accessibility, what Transmilenio is doing with adequating their stops for people who can't see, for people who have reduced mobility, the re-significance of spaces that have been traditionally unsafe, like bicycles in the city, with the Institute for Sport and Recreation and Transportation to give new meaning to these spaces. Some people may say that's not much, but the value promise that we have here is that these are things that are generating value and that are going to start growing and make more and more and more noise in benefit of women and those people that you take care of in this city. So the legacy that we want to leave in this system planning for mobility is not just raw data, but just listening to people. And so that we can design systems starting from what we talk to people in the territory. We arrive with a vision, and that is we can't plan mobility for the city just with models and algorithms that I can do as an engineer in a computer at the secretariat. If this doesn't start from what I'm gathering by talking to the different sectors and social groups in the territory, we're not going to have a real impact. So starting from that view, that's where we're working in the Secretariat for Mobility. I think this is very important with what territory planning for governance we were talking about before, in the generation and interpretation and what that data says for designing systems is very important. So, Catherine, from the experience of the Sport and Recreation Department or Institute, and then I'm going to talk to Carolina and Vanessa, what concrete strategies, thinking about design, can be promoted to have in our cities a mobility that's safe, that's equal, and that's autonomous, but without having an over vigilance or a control? We were talking about yesterday a lot about control and transportation, having wagons that are single for single genders. That also generates a lot of controversy. So can we do to create more concrete strategies to have that safe and inclusive transportation and mobility? Well, you can think that the connection between sport and recreation and enjoying public spaces has nothing to do with mobility, but that's not true. From the Institute for Recreation and Sport, we have one of the most beloved programs in the whole city, which is the Ciclovia of Bogotá. And most women and people who are here today know what the Ciclovia is. And I think it's important to mention that in this space, because it gives us a perspective of public spaces don't necessarily have to be surveyed with cameras, with police, but the transformation of public spaces that allows for people to feel safe, supported, makes for people to have a different enjoyment of these spaces. The ciclovia is not just this recreational space where we go out with our families or with our colleagues, our friends. It's also the first opportunity for many children, many girls, many young women to go out and ride a bike on their own, to take a tour of the city, their neighborhood, their locality on their own, but with other people. So we did a research with the Culture Secretariat where they mentioned that people, despite being on their journey on the Sundays and holidays, despite the fact that they're alone, they feel safe. We've also included joint work with the Women's Secretariat so that they can find the attention points for gender violence and some guidance there too. Our guardians are also trained to help people regarding safe routes for attention in the district. And I'm going to talk about this later, but we also tell you that we have the repetitive spots where you can learn to ride a bike. It doesn't matter how old you are, it doesn't matter what gender you are. Our guardians and the people who work with us in the Bogota MBC program are trained to do so. And I go back to the beginning idea, which is that through these other tools for mobility that aren't motorized, to have independence and security in the short uh, journeys that happen throughout the city. So picking up the children, doing grocery shopping, going to the store, paying for our utilities. These are short journeys that caretakers have to take that don't necessarily require these really long times moving to different lines. It gives you the autonomy and the safety to do it in the public space.
Thank you so much, Vanessa. Thank you from the Metro of Quito. How have we thought from a contract point of view, how concretely can we push forward those safe spaces, those autonomous spaces, again, with strategies that don't need over policing? Yes, I wanted to let you know before something additional about how we have been doing since we started operating the metro. We haven't been operating for 2 years yet, and one of the most important subjects that we have been treating is to provide women give them back the time that they use during transportation. So we ask them, what do you use with that time what do you do that with that time that you have gained? And they say, I've slept more, I have had breakfast because I didn't used to be able to have breakfast before. They also say, because I get back home during the day before it gets dark, which is something that meant that before it took you so long to get back home that it was always night before you got home. So this makes us think about strategies to empower those benefits that we're already having in our operation. One of them, the most important one, is strategies zero harassment. And that is the result of studies from a long time ago that analyzed what happens in public transportation, and that women had said during questionnaires that one of the places that they felt most insecure was in public transportation. So we have a strategy that doesn't belong just to the metro, it belongs to the entire metropolitan system of transportation, and it includes a strategy of living together. So we are based in the metro culture, in a change of behavior within the system, and in the respect of everybody's rights. So we don't have an exclusive wagon for women, which was discussed yesterday, but we believe that men and women can travel together in a harmonious way, respecting our spaces and our needs. And we do support ourselves in control. We have cameras, we have technology, we have panic buttons in every single station, and we have acting protocols. So if a person is harassed or sees harassment, they can turn to the panic button, and in the next station, the train will stop, and the station agents who have been trained for this to provide attention to the victim and to contain the situation. And if they want to denounce the aggressor, then that's another later process. But it's another thing that is not based on control, repression, or vigilance, but it is based on cohesion and in Pacific, the sense of living together in a Pacific way, and also in the awareness of the people that work in the metro, including the police, national police. But we also believe that to guarantee safe transportation, we need more than just that. Strategies cannot be just from mobility, but they also have to come from the other actors. We are an underground metro, and sometimes people will go downstairs and they feel in another world, but we want for them to be also safe on the surface and in the street around the stations. So the surroundings of the stations also have to be safe. They have to be lit, they have to be safe to walk, they have to be safe to cycle there. And for that we need coordination with other secretariats from the district. And that is what we're talking about, the intersectoriality that we have been talking about. And that is something linked to the panel from before, as a strategy is coordination with mobility and uh, urban planning. So in Quito, we have a model of city that is polis-centered. So there isn't one single city center, but that there are services distributed all over the city, especially connected to the metro or close to the metro stations. And what this looks for is to not only reduce mobility times, but also to have people move less, to have to move around the city a lot less. So, because if you have everything you need close to where you live, then you don't need to move around the city. And that is fundamental in the framework of the discussion that we've been having these past few days in the terms of the right to time, because we're not just dedicating a lot of time in moving around the city, but also to have things close to us because that improves our quality of life and it improves our city. Thank you so much, Vanessa. And Carolina, you mentioned also a few things, but from this perspective of research to understand what these needs are in terms of mobility, what are also those feelings that you have researched, what strategies can we propose? Well, I think that I'm going to base myself on what they said before and what we've been talking about from the Mobility Secretariat. The things that the fact that we are doing participatory exercises, I can guarantee through these that spaces are a lot safer in terms of mobility and public transportation, and also when it comes to walking. I'm going to emphasize on public transportation because it's what women use the most, but these participatory exercises also help us find out things that the academia has already mentioned that they don't work. So I know that there's a high preoccupation with evasion on the payment method in Transmilenio and also in the public buses outside of Transmilenio, and this affects the economics and the financial capacity of the system. So all of these participatory exercises can help us correct and provide better solutions for these issues. And with these studies, we have found that the elderly tend to use public buses and not so much Transmilenio to move around, but it is precisely there where pregnant women, where people who are larger, or people who are disabled are starting to have a whole bunch of accidents and access barriers in terms of how do I get there? How do I get on the bus? And for example, in Chile, they have shown some studies that shown that tourniquets for people who already did move in public transportation would stop using it because of the tourniquet. So when it comes to women, we don't want to have them have make changes that we don't that are not convenient for them. And women are more prone to not using, for example, motorcycles. Well, women are starting to use motorcycles as well. But in terms of using motorcycles specifically, motorcycles are very large, and women are starting, or they're too big. But now they're using electric motorcycles. They're using motorbikes that are three-wheeled motorcycles. So what we have now is that users that used to use public transportation are no longer using it. So because we cannot keep them safe. And in that respect, I wanted to go back to what you were saying about having gender exclusive wagons. Uh, our participation methods have let us know that that is the best solution because people believe that it is better to control in a way because these exclusive wagons, what they do is that they segregate diverse communities. And so we have a whole bunch of violences associated to women that are and men that are trans. And that is something that we simply cannot allow. So something that I also wanted to emphasize is that in public transportation, we have very high times of waiting, especially because of demand and because of the frequency of buses. So sometimes a person can wait for a bus to arrive over 30 minutes. And so we have to work on strategies. At some point, there was a strategy that was move safely. And what they did was that they would perceive a series of factors that made public spaces safer. And that is where public planning comes in to analyze what walking and waiting for the bus. We have to guarantee that those activities are safe. And we have known for many years that the street is a place that we inhabit and it is made to be inhabited. So it has to be a place where we can work with people so that we can understand from our own idiosyncrasies how we can generate these spaces and not just bring international models. And it's not just important to do local research, but for example, the Andes University is working to research from the local spaces to create strategies, understanding every single context. So thank you so much. I think that you've been talking about very important subjects because it's not just thinking about the bus, the metro wagon, the bicycle, but it's thinking about the city in and of itself, public spaces, and how these public spaces integrate with each other, and that requires an intersectoral work. So this leads me to my next question, where I would like to ask Juan David and then Vanessa, what type of allegiances or alliances between different sectors as the government, the community, the academia are needed to push forward that gender-focused mobility and the rights of women? um, to be able to transform infrastructure, but also dynamics, so that we can change those imaginaries that you were mentioning before, Catherine, about the way that we behave. All right, thank you. Well, when it comes to formality, I would say that the Secretariat of Mobility have some allegiances with entities. Obviously, with this Women's Secretariat, we have the policy of women and gender equity. We have the Table of Sophia, where we fight against we combat these violences in public transportation. We have a very good alliance in Cundinamarca with Copenhagen, where we're talking about projects for bicycles infrastructure. But we want to look at this from a gender focus because people think that people who use bicycles, we use bicycles the same way because we use the same bicycle routes. But in reality, what we have been working on is to be able to include that lens how women girls, the elderly women use bicycles in a very different ways. Uh, we have been working with the European Union to recategorize women who want to work in the transportation center that has been historically worked on mostly by men. But I think that our main alliance right now is the one that we have with communities that are key to be able to transform the realities that were mentioned before in terms of how they live the city. So right now we are working on something that changes consultancies of the women who have been working for the past 3 years. So, counselors on children as well, they have been changing, and we want to continue dialogues with the population with these different groups, more specifically. So, what we have a lot of formal alliances between entities and international uh, stakeholders. But right now, the most important thing that we can do is what we do directly with the people in each territory, with those girls, with those women, with those district groups of women, with the elderly. That can truly let us know whether what we're doing is leading us to down the right road, because we know that it is not enough, but maybe we know that we're going the right way. So from our mayor's perspective, our initiative was we have to go to the neighborhoods, we have to talk to the people, we have to make sure that whether what we're doing is the real antidote for the problems that the city has. And basically, also, we have to work on changing behaviors. And it is also something that the Cultural Secretariat is dedicating a lot of work to, associating to subjects of time, care, and gender. So, how can we change our citizens' behaviors that are causing problems in transportation through violences, through public spaces with bad behaviors? So obviously, there are many leaderships that are very important in the sector, in different sectors, where we're working with subjects that are very important, but that we know that are not enough, and that is why we need to include the voice of the society of citizens, so that we know which way we have to go. So, Vanessa, yes, I coincide with this. I think that it's very important to make allegiances with with communities. Right now, we work a lot with the people who are living around the areas of influence of the metro, because we are the new neighbor, and the new neighbor brings things that are interesting, like economic reconnection and reactivation, but it also brings challenges. Like, for example, now there's people who leave in huge amounts from a station and they enter this neighborhood. So now the people who live and work in this neighborhood, they have to adapt to these changes, because this is a massive system of mobility. So neighborhoods are being greatly invaded by huge amounts of people. So we have to work with these neighborhoods, with the communities that are next to the metro. And this has come from the construction, because this has also affected the neighborhoods in terms of noises, closing of roads. So we have to coordinate, and that is an fundamental aspect. Another allegiance is with users because we are always interviewing and asking questions to the users to see what they think, what benefits they are having. And with that data, we are working with academia and sharing information so that academia can analyze whether mobility patterns are changing or whether the strategies are actually being effective and how they can provide feedback so that we can improve. And another alliance that is very important are institutional, especially with the financial sector, because this construction required financing, especially with the bid. Now we are asking them to help us finance a video game for the youth, for young people that deals with issues of prevention of violence. So we're doing this. We're carrying out the pilot plan for this, and we love this idea. And the other thing that we want to do is to share with other transportation systems from Latin America that can also use those tools that we have generated. So I think that coordination with and allegiances are vital. And the other thing that I think is very important is to take a look at public transportation systems as tools to materialize the right to time, not just like a bus that is faster or a bus that goes underground, but really as a mechanism of social transformation. And in that sense, Bogota has a great opportunity with what is happening with the metro that is being planned and that has already received its first trains. It has a great opportunity to work in an articulate manner from the secretariats to the communities so that the metro can change people's lives, not just their mobility, but to return to them the time that they have lost moving around the city, and so that it can take advantage of this time to be happier. Thank you, Vanessa. And speaking of changing lives, I think that bicycles is one of those transportation systems that have allowed people to change. Because and I do mention that because bicycles have also changed my life, and because this is Bicycle Week. I wanted to ask you, Catherine, what strategies of mobility have been developed from this administration, and particularly from the institute, to guarantee that women and specifically caregivers that live in the periphery, not just in the city center, can access safely and continuously to the use of bicycles. Okay, so the strategies, I would like to look at them from four different aspects and not just from the institutions. And the first one is presence in the city. For us, it is very important uh, to be within the localities. Bogota has 21 localities, and we have the bicycle school in 19 of them, including Sumapaz, which is the rural locality of Bogota, and it is the farthest point at which we can be. So with the bicycle schools, we are present in almost the entire territory of Bogota. And of course, in presence in the city, it includes the bicycle rides, where we have 138 kilometers, and we opened another 11 kilometers in Bosa, in the neighborhoods of Porvenir, and that uh, causes women who dedicate time to care tasks on the Sundays, they can use the time that they have available to them on Sundays, they can use it to go on bicycle routes. So also providing company or accompanying processes of security, of education, of mechanics when it comes to the use of bicycle that allows us to have that independence and that safety of getting to know your neighborhood, of going out to the locality, of having us go out into the city. And we have strengthened, in that aspect, we have strengthened the people who work with us in terms of gender equity. Something that was mentioned before, including bicycles, bicycles are also very masculine. So the guardians of the bicycles, this is a program. We want to increase female guardians because, well, the female guardians of the bicycles are also victims of harassment when they're carrying out their tasks. And we also want to increase the amount of women who are also the bicycle mechanics. So guides and teachers in the bicycle schools, for example. In this presence and in this way of accompanying people during 2025, we have impacted 24,000 people, 80% of them being women. And we have cases that are really beautiful. Um, because some of them are elderly women who have learned to use a bike after they became 60 years old, and I know that we think that we can only learn to use a bicycle if we're young or if we're four or if we're teenagers, but we can also do it when we're 60. Miss Letty, who is a lady who has been with us for a while, she has 72 years and she learned 2 years ago how to use it, and now she moves around in the bicycle and she does it safely in Fontiwan. And so it can be done. We can totally do it. So we can use these strategies, these accompanying strategies, having a presence within the city of understanding what the needs are at different moments of our lives, and also to understand for which we have for understanding for which we have strengthened our data about gender, how bicycle routes have been are behaving lately, and because and even though we already have all of this information, we also have to be thinking about how to innovate. So last year, our ciclovia, our bicycle route, it's been working for over 50 years. So imagine that 50 years of bicycle routes in Bogota. So what's going to happen in the next 50 years of the bicycle routes? How are we going to innovate? What are we going to take into consideration? Girls, young people, women, animals, the city is not polycentric, but it's as if it was. It might as well be. So we have to go to other localities. We have to connect more parks. We have to connect more routes through the ciclovias, through the bicycle routes. Those are our strategies, and that is why I wanted to mention it. Not so much as something that we do just to understand communities. It's more something to understand communities, but I didn't want to just say these are the programs, this is budget, and these are the strategies. It's a social and community comprehension, comprehensive strategy. I would also like to point out a subject that has been in the fad in the past few weeks, and it's that we have been having many challenges. Sorry, there's noise. We have many challenges as a city when we implement infrastructure for bicycle routes. And that those challenges are presenting themselves mainly in the areas where we want to implement this infrastructure. People are opposed to it. And usually the people that are opposed to it, without wanting to generalize, are those that move using cars or using Uber or taxi, and this is causing some problems when it comes to planning these projects and implementing these projects. Like for example, what we started doing last week in uh, at the 50th Avenue. We want to join 50th Avenue all the way from the South Highway, 13th Street, Las Americas Avenue, until we reach 63rd Street up to the Aquatic Complex. And it joins the south of the city to the orient of the city with all the people who use the bicycle routes. And even though we are carrying out an exercise of being able to socialize these projects and talking to people, we are realizing that people who use the bicycle or who like bicycles or who want to walk uh, usually don't get in the moment that we need help.
so that it's safe and more comfortable, and so that they can be more illuminated. And we had invited Andes, Universidad Nacional Design School, so that they can let us know what we can do better. And women are getting off public transportation and getting on motorbikes or electric vehicles that look like motorbikes. And that is that we want you back on public transportation. We want you back on bicycles, but where we want you less is in those motorized mediums that have the most security issues. And most accidents that happen in Bogota are happening due to motorcycles. To transversalize gender focuses, open to the Women's Secretariat, to leaders and women from collectives that want to review it, so that you can give us feedback if we are on the right track or not. I would like to ask if we have some time for questions. I don't know. You can let me know. Okay, we're a little short on time, but you know, the doors are always open to participate in all of these spaces. I imagine there are channels for mobility. Keep an eye on the medium so that you can participate in these spaces. There are many lessons. Thank you very much. I'm not going to go too much into detail, but highlighting the importance of having information to be able to make decisions regarding mobility and infrastructure, and how people in these spaces. And to think of mobility is also to think about improving quality of time. Thank you very much. Thank you very much to our panelists. Thank you to Caterina Mayaroa, who has been with us, and to Juanita Bernal, and all of the people who have been here today with us with these reflections on the impact of planification and climate change in great cities. We conclude this first part for today, cities with a gender focus, climate change and urban change. For those of you following the event through social media, connect again after 2 p.m. And we will have our pause today. We will be back at 2 p.m. with our second time for the day today. International Forum for Gender and Building Cities. When women earn time, the city wins.